The first thing Lena noticed was how quiet the forest had become. Not the usual quiet, never that. Even deep in the woods, there was always something. Insects grinding against the dark, branches shifting, wind threading through needles. But this silence felt arranged, like it had been set in place carefully. Every stray sound removed and tucked away. "Do you hear that?" she asked. Merrick didn't look up from the fire. He was crouched low, coaxing a reluctant flame out of damp wood. His hands blackened with soot. "Hear what?" "Exactly." Lena hugged her arms tighter. The cold had come on fast, sharper than the forecast had suggested. It clung to her wrists, her neck, like fingers testing the edges of her skin. Jonah stirred from where he sat on a fallen log, boots propped too close to the fire. "You're just tired. We all are." He yawned, then added, "It's been a long hike." Across from him, Sumi zipped her jacket higher, her eyes scanning the tree line. "No," she said quietly. "It's different tonight." Merrick finally glanced up. "Different how?" Sumi hesitated, then shook her head. "I don't know. Just wrong." The fire cracked, a small, uneven sound that seemed louder than it should have been. For a moment, all four of them watched the flames as if they might explain something. They didn't. They'd reached the campsite just before dusk, following a narrow trail that had all but disappeared under a blanket of fallen leaves. It wasn't an official site, just a clearing Merrick had marked on an old map, something he'd found online. Underrated, he'd called it. No crowds, no noise, no signal either. At first, that had felt like part of the appeal. Now it felt like something else. "Okay," Jonas said suddenly, pushing himself up. "I'm going to grab more wood before it gets too dark." Merrick gestured vaguely toward the treeline. "Stay close. There's plenty of deadfall around." "I'm not an idiot." "No," Merrick said almost absently. "Just careless." Jonah smirked but didn't argue. He grabbed the small flashlight from his pack and disappeared into the trees, the beam swinging in loose arcs between trunks. The others listened as his footsteps faded. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. Then nothing. Minutes passed. The fire strengthened, casting longer shadows that wavered against the uneven ground. Lena found herself watching those shadows more than the trees themselves. They seemed to stretch too far, bending at angles that didn't quite match the shapes casting them. "You think he's okay?" she asked. Merrick shrugged. "He's probably just taking his time. He said he'd stay close. He always says that." Sumi stood abruptly. "I'll go check." "You don't have to." "I know." She grabbed her headlamp and clicked it on. The light cut a clean line through the dark, steadier than Jonah's had been. "Jonah?" she called, stepping into the trees. No answer. She moved a few paces farther, sweeping the light across the forest floor. Leaves, roots, the pale curve of a fallen branch. Then, "Hey," she said. "Come here." There was something in her voice. Not fear, not yet, just a tightening. Lena and Merrick exchanged a look before following. The beam of Sumi's headlamp settled on a patch of ground just beyond the clearing. Footprints, clear enough to see in the soft, damp soil. Boot prints. Jonah's, without question, same tread pattern, same size. But they didn't make sense. Lena stepped closer, her breath catching as she tried to follow their path. "They split," she said. Merrick frowned. "What do you mean?" "Look." The prints came from the direction of the camp, leading outward into the trees. But at a certain point, they divided. One set continued forward, deeper into the forest. The other turned sharply, heading back toward the camp. But that wasn't the strange part. "They're both leaving," Sumi said. Merrick crouched, running his fingers just above the impressions without touching them. "That's not possible." "Maybe he doubled back," Lena said, though it sounded weak even to her. "Stepped in his own prints or something." "No," Merrick said. "Look at the depth. These were made at the same time. Same pressure. Same stride." Sumi swallowed. It's like he walked in two directions at once. They stood there, the four of them reduced to three, staring at the ground as if it might rearrange itself into something logical. "Jonah?" Lena called again, louder this time. The forest didn't answer. "We should follow one," Merrick said. "Which one?" Lena asked. He hesitated. The set leading deeper into the woods seemed darker somehow, the impressions more pronounced, as if the earth had accepted them more willingly. The set leading back toward camp looked lighter, less certain. "Camp," Sumi said. "If he turned back, he might already be there." Merrick nodded slowly. "Okay, we check camp first. Stay close." They followed the returning set of prints, stepping carefully around them. The beam of Sumi's headlamp tracked each impression, as if losing sight of them might cause something irreversible. The path was short, too short. Within seconds, the clearing came back into view. The fire still burned. Their packs were untouched, and no one was there. "He's not here," Lena said, her voice thin. Merrick scanned the area. He couldn't have. A sound cut him off. Footsteps. From the trees. All three of them turned. The light caught movement. Something approaching, just beyond the edge of the clearing. "Jonah?" Sumi called. The figure stepped into view. It was him, or something that looked like him. Same jacket, same posture. The flashlight hung loosely in his hand, its beam pointed at the ground. But he didn't look up. "Jonah," Lena said, relief rushing in too fast, too sharp. "Where were you? We found your—" "Don't," Sumi whispered. Lena froze. There was something wrong with the way he stood. Too still, too centered, like he'd been placed there. "Jonah," Merrick said carefully. "Hey, look at me." Slowly, the figure raised its head. The light hit his face, and for a moment, everything seemed normal. Then he smiled. Not a full smile, just the corners of his mouth, lifting slightly, without touching his eyes. "Did you see them?" he asked. His voice was right, almost. "What?" Merrick said. "The footprints," he said. "They're strange, aren't they?" Lena felt her stomach drop. "How do you know about that?" He tilted his head, considering. "I followed them too," he said. "From where?" Sumi asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he took a step forward. The fire flickered, and for a brief, impossible second, Lena saw it. Another set of footprints forming beneath his boots. Not behind him, not in front, splitting. One pressing into the dirt toward the camp, the other pressing away. At the same time. "Stop," Merrick said, his voice sharp. The figure froze. "Don't come any closer." It smiled again, a little wider this time. "You came back," it said. "That's good. We need you to stay there," Sumi said, her hand trembling as she reached for Lena's arm. "Why?" it asked, almost genuinely curious. "Because you're not—" Lena started, then stopped. "Not what? Not Jonah? But he was. He had to be. The face was right. The voice was right. And yet, where's the other one?" Merrick asked suddenly. The figure blinked. "The one who kept walking," Merrick said. "Where is he?" For the first time, something flickered in the figure's expression. Confusion, or irritation. "There isn't another one," it said. "That's not what the ground says." A pause. Then the figure looked down at its feet, at the splitting prints, and something in its posture shifted, as if it were noticing them for the first time. "Oh," it said softly. The word felt wrong, like it had learned it too late. The forest made a sound then, a low, distant crunch, not from the clearing, from deeper in the trees. All three of them turned instinctively toward it. Another step, another, moving slowly, deliberately closer. Marek's voice dropped to a whisper. "There's something else out there." Behind them, the figure laughed. Not loudly, not wildly, just a quiet, breathy sound, like air slipping through something that wasn't meant to hold it. "You shouldn't have looked," it said. Lena didn't turn around. She didn't want to see if it had moved. "Stay together," Sumi whispered. The footsteps in the forest continued. Closer now, matching a rhythm that felt familiar. Too familiar. Jonah? Lena called, her voice breaking. The steps stopped. Silence rushed back in, heavier than before. Then, a voice. From the trees. Lena, her heart lurched. It was him. It was really him. Jonah, she shouted. Don't, Merrick said. But it was too late. The voice came again, clearer now. I'm over here. I got turned around. There's something weird with the trail. Behind them, the figure shifted. Lena could feel it, even without looking. The air changed. Cold pressed in closer. 2 directions, it whispered. The voice in the trees took a step forward. Leaves crunched. Guys! Lena turned. Just slightly. Just enough to see the edge of the clearing. A shape stood there, half lit by the fire. Jonah. Real. Breathing. Confused. And at the same time, behind her, the other one took a step closer. The ground accepted both of them. In 2 directions. At once. No one moved. No one spoke. Because whichever one they chose, one of them would be wrong. The tent whispers. The wind had dropped hours ago, leaving the forest in a taut silence. Only the occasional snap of a twig reminded them they weren't alone. Around their small campfire, the 4 of them sat in uneasy quiet, each absorbed in the dim orange glow that fractured the darkness. Clara poked at the embers with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the void. It's too quiet, she said, voice barely above a whisper. I feel like we're being watched. Ben, leaning back on his pack, smirked. You always feel like that. It's the woods, Clara. Just shadows and wind. Not all shadows, said Mara, her voice low, almost trembling. She traced a finger along the rim of her mug, eyes darting to the tree line beyond the firelight. Some feel heavier, like they're waiting. Eli, the practical one of the group, rolled his shoulders. We set up tents. Lights are low. If there was someone or something here, they'd be obvious by now. Clara didn't answer. Her gaze kept returning to the tent on the far side of the fire. It was Ben's, newly pitched, the nylon taut and dark against the trees. She swallowed hard. Started just after midnight. She had gone to refill her water bottle at the stream, leaving the others wrapped in their sleeping bags, and had barely finished when she heard it. A whisper. Soft. Hushed. Clara. She froze. Her breath caught. The tent flaps didn't move. No shadow passed over the ground. The voice was faint, almost imperceptible, yet distinct. Her name drawn out like silk on stone. Ben? She called, stepping closer. The firelight flickered as if uncertain, shadows leaping. Yeah. His voice was muffled from inside his tent. She shook her head. I thought I heard someone. Probably just the wind, Ben said. Or a raccoon. Clara didn't believe him. The forest had its sounds, yes, but this was different. A whisper didn't echo like wind. A whisper chose you. She stayed near the fire, trying to shake it off, but the feeling clung to her like cold dew. Mara noticed her shifting and frowned. You okay? Maybe it's nothing, Clara said, forcing a smile she didn't feel. Just the woods. Eli leaned forward, cupping his hands around the firelight. I don't like this. The air's wrong. Too still. Even the crickets stopped. That was true. Since Clara returned, the usual chorus of night insects had vanished. The silence wasn't comfortable, it was waiting. Hours passed in a strained quiet. Eventually, they all dozed lightly, the fire shrinking to a feeble glow. Clara was half asleep when it came again. Clara, closer this time from the tent. Clearer. The nylon walls seemed to pulse with the sound. Subtle vibrations she could almost feel on her skin. Her eyes shot open. She froze, heart hammering. The tent was empty. Ben wasn't inside. She knew it. Clara. It wasn't a voice from inside that tent. Not in the way a person speaks. It was the forest itself, compressing her name into the shape of speech. Cold. Soft. Certain. She shook Mara awake. Did you hear that? Mara blinked, groggy. Hear what? The tent. It said my name. Inside. But it's empty. Eli frowned, unzipping his own tent. You mean inside Ben's tent? Yes, Clara whispered, panic rising. I swear someone or something was in there. They approached the tent together. Clara's hands shook as she reached for the zipper. The whisper came again, low now, almost purring. Clara. The name twisted in the darkness, not just spoken, but pulled, stretched, curling around her mind. She stepped back, breath ragged. Mara gripped her arm. It's a prank, right, Ben? Mara called. But the tent flaps were still. Empty. Silent except for that faint, breathing echo. Eli examined the tent. Nothing here. Zips closed. No footprints. How the hell? The whisper shifted. It wasn't her name this time. It was theirs one by one. Mara. Eli. Ben. Each syllable seemed to crawl through the soil and up the nylon walls, slow and deliberate, settling in the chest like a weight. The forest held its breath. Ben stepped out of the shadows, rubbing his eyes. What's going on? Clara turned to him, voice trembling. It's the tent. It talks. It knows our names. Ben laughed nervously. That's ridiculous. No tent talks. We're just. Then the whisper came again, and this time they all heard it. All of you. It wasn't coming from any single tent. It wasn't a sound reflected off nylon or canvas. It came from inside and outside, everywhere and nowhere. The air itself seemed to breathe with it. Mara stumbled back, eyes wide. What is it? Eli's voice was steady but tight. I don't know, but we stay together. Don't split up. They huddled near the dying fire. The whispers ebbed and flowed, twisting through the trees, sometimes close enough that they could feel it press against their faces, other times receding into a hollow nothingness. It was patient, like a predator that had no need to chase, just to wait. Hours blurred. They spoke little, only in whispers themselves. Every time they tried to sleep, the tent called them. Names. Soft, intimate, mocking. A cadence they recognized but didn't want to answer. At dawn, the whispering stopped. Or maybe they just didn't hear it over the wind. They packed in silence, eyes flitting to every shadow, every rustling leaf. The forest seemed to breathe normally again, the usual chorus returning. Relief was shallow. When they hiked out later that morning, Ben glanced back at the campsite. The tent, Ben's tent, was perfectly still, sun glinting off its nylon walls. He shivered. Clara lingered, staring. Something about the way the shadows pooled around the flaps made her stomach twist. She could almost hear it again. Faint, patient, waiting. Do you think it follows us? She asked, voice small. Mara didn't answer. She just shook her head and walked on. Eli, ahead of the group, paused, hand on a tree trunk, listening. Even in the bright morning, he felt it. Not outside, not in the forest, but in the hollowed-out corners of his mind. The echo of a voice that knew him. Ben, finally moving, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air. Something had brushed against him last night. Something that whispered. Something that would remember their names long after they left. They didn't speak of it on the trail. Only the crunch of boots on dry leaves. Only the sunlight on the treetops. Only the faint, impossible feeling that they weren't entirely walking away from the campsite. Later, when they returned to civilization, they joked about it. About fatigue, imagination, the woods playing tricks. But Clara sometimes woke to the faintest murmur in her own apartment. Her name, soft, curling at the edges of her mind. Not loud enough for anyone else to hear, but always there, waiting, patient, because some things don't stop with dawn, because some voices never leave the tent.